Welcome to Season 2 of the Project Hope podcast. I'm your host, Jennifer. As many of you know, I am a cult survivor myself. For anyone interested, you can hear the story of how I got in and how I got out in Season 1, Episodes 1 and 2. The beginning of this year, 2023, actually marks my 11 years of being out, and I am so super grateful for the ways my life has unfolded since. I now work with survivors of coercive control, and I'm going to take a moment here to define this term, as one of my heart's desires is to help society at large better understand coercive control in cases that are not just culty, but across the globe. I view coercive control as a social issue. It's at the heart of cases where women and girls are murdered. We find coercive control in one-to-one relationships that are intimate, in gangs, sex trafficking, and cults of all types. I have a master's in the psychology of coercive control, and I'm just beginning a new element of my career as an expert witness for legal cases that involve coercive control. As a certified trauma professional, I work with survivors. I'm especially excited to be offering a group survivor program for cult and religious abuse recovery. So this is not a support group, but rather a healing program. It's based on my certification in the incredible work of Dr. Jilly Jenkinson, who gathered decades of research on survivors to create a body of work that I would consider to be the most comprehensive and flexible approach I've come across in this field. We will meet every other week for 6 months, and registration will open in February of 2023 for those interested. Lastly, I am also a research associate at Salford University and explore topics related to coercive control. So let's jump back into a basic understanding of coercive control before I introduce the next episode. Coercive control is a strategic pattern of behavior designed to exploit, control, create dependency, and dominate. The victim's everyday existence is micromanaged, and their space for action, as well as potential as a human being, is limited and controlled by the abuser. Initially, the victim may be drawn into the relationship with love bombing and charm. Then gaslighting, isolation, economic control, and financial abuse can take place alongside rules and regulations that are gradually introduced over time and change at the whim of the abuser. The victim knows there are consequences if rules are broken, and they apply to the victim rather than the perpetrator, creating a double standard. Over time, coercively controlling behavior erodes the victim's sense of self, their confidence, self-esteem, agency, and autonomy. The abuser creates an unreal world of contradiction, confusion, and fear. It may be helpful to know that 51% of victims do not even know that they are being abused, manipulated, and controlled. Coercive control correlates significantly to serious harm, and in many cases, in intimate partner violence, it precedes homicide. These can be difficult topics to grapple with, so I truly hope that this podcast helps to protect you and those you love with helpful voices and information. If you appreciate the podcast, please let us know by subscribing and comment with kindness. And always think critically, trust your intuition, and be free. Welcome to this part 1 of a 2-part series with Jaia Suri. You may recall Jaia from our bonus episode that preceded this season. It was a music teaser bonus episode, as it's Jaia's voice that you all have been hearing on the Project Hope podcast this season. Leaving the Cult, the title of the song, is obviously the song Jaia wrote about her experience in the cult she was in. And if you haven't realized already, she and I were in the same group. I will mention here the morphing of names that the cult leader, Peter Bowes, has called the group. It began as the Order of Christ Sophia, and each location was referred to as a center of light. So when I was there, this was the case. Shortly after I left, 11 years ago, the two leaders of the group split. One leader of the group has since passed, and Peter, who was co-director of the group, called his organization Ruach, or Ruach Center. And its current iteration is now Inner Path Light, or Inner Path Center, now located in Knoxville, Tennessee. For those interested, the websites for both the Knoxville Center and also Peter's personal website are in the show notes. My decision to include these are based on my hope to educate the public, though honestly, I don't think there's a high risk for people joining, as the group is now very small and isolated. You can see on their website that they don't offer anything to the public. If perhaps we look at the website as representative of anything, it's Peter's narcissism, as the only offerings are his plethora of books and music. The only teacher listed is him. It seems the only real service being provided is Peter's use and abuse of his followers. I state all of this confidently because even since Jaia and I recorded this interview months ago, I've received even more clarifying information directly from his victims regarding abuse allegations that are considered illegal in the United States. It is for all those who have been or are currently being harmed by Peter, including but not limited to the ripple effects into the families, the abandoned children, the abandoned spouses, and families of origin they have been turned against. And I think Jaia truly has these ones in mind as well, as you will hear from her caring heart what she's considering throughout the podcast. While she shares her personal story, it's obvious that she is also considering others. You, our lovely audience, and those we have been bonded to through our experience in this group. We have traveled this journey and we understand. People leave this group in all sorts of states, with different wounds, different needs and desires. We honor and respect the sensitivities around all of this, and we are here for you if and when you'd like to connect. For our listeners, I believe that as Jaia and I share more, you will identify the tactics as classic coercion and the leader as a classic malignant narcissist. And for those of you interested in learning more, I've put a link in the show notes to Dan Shaw's book called Traumatic Narcissism and Recovery. As part of the next episode with Jaia, I will read an excerpt from the book that further explains traumatic narcissism, which for me has been a description that most accurately describes Peter, our ex-cult leader. And now, it's a pleasure to get to say a few words about Jaia, who currently lives in California with her husband and 2 children. Jaia is a singer-songwriter who has built her career on deeply personal and introspective lyrics and unwavering honesty in expressing her experience through Eastern melodies, unusual tunings, and percussion on the body of her guitar and banjo. The first chapter of her music career took place in her 20s, touring the folk circuit year-round in a veggie-greased power rig. During this time, she released 3 albums with Vagabond Records, and you can access all of her music on Spotify at Jaia Suri. After a heartbreaking personal experience just prior to the release of her 4th studio recording, Strawberry Hat, in 2007, Jaia let go of all musical pursuits and joined a Monastic-Christian Mystical Order, where she spent the next 7 years intensively practicing meditation and prayer and eventually ministering as an ordained priest. Finding the work deeply gratifying, though in the end pretty cultish, she left that path and began another, more supportive inner path, which continues to fuel her life's work of spiritual development. Her official return to songwriting and recording was prompted by an undeniable passion for expressing beauty, meaning, and authenticity. She shares that coming back to music was in some ways a coming back to herself, and she uncovered hundreds of songs that simply had been waiting to be recorded over the last 15 years. I know that I'm biased, as Jaia is also a dear friend of mine, but I'm grateful to share this beautiful person with you all today, as she expresses such thoughtful considerations around all that she's been through in the wild ride of life up to this point. Thank you for joining me in welcoming Jaia Suri to the Project Hope podcast. So welcome to the Project Hope podcast, Jaia Suri. It's so wonderful to have you here.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be doing this finally. We've had so many conversations on the phone, and this is kind of like the one we're recording.
Yes, right. Yes. And for our audience, it's a very unique and I would say special opportunity for me also to be speaking with some of the individuals that I had these very intimate and deep experiences with in our group. So we're obviously going to get into some of that today, but I think, Jaia, we'd like to just begin by asking a little bit about kind of your background, whatever you're sort of comfortable sharing around that. And maybe that's a nice kind of intro into what led you to the Order of Christ Sophia initially, which of course has changed names since. But.
Yeah, I'm happy to just start. And I also want to say at the beginning that I'm sort of aware of my heart beating fast and just this knowing that the people who are still in the group and the cult leader are probably going to be hearing this because we've been told that they listen to what we post online. So I'm just kind of acknowledging that that's present for me, that it brings a little bit of a initial tension, and I have to sort of inside myself just continue to sort of push his voice out so that I have the autonomy to share open-heartedly, because he's definitely become sort of a part of my internalized inner critic. And so I just want to say that up front, that I'm sort of going to be working with that as we go, so that I feel like I can like back him off and have the space to have this conversation. So I'm just going to take a breath with that right away.
Yeah, I'll take a breath with you.
And and also that I feel really touched to get to share my story with some of the families of people who are in cults, and just like feeling a lot of love and compassion for you. And like, you're the reason that I'm sharing this. So I'm just kind of realigning with that. So yeah, now I'm feeling my heart kind of expanding. So that's, yeah, sorry.
Sharing that, too. I appreciate that, Jaia. And I think so many come on here with a risk of vulnerability, in the exposure of one's story and one's feelings. And so I think also I'm just really appreciating you bringing in, just that emotional element that I do suspect actually a lot of others have encountered when we begin and open up this discussion. And so I'm appreciating that because I feel also an honor around kind of everyone of the past that's been here with me.
Yes.
In the future, and just how, with survivors, we talk about courage and sharing our stories, and people have lots of different reasons why they share, and maybe it's not total courage, or sometimes it doesn't feel like strength or courage. But I think what you're speaking to, whatever that principle is, I'm very much feeling it alive in you, and, kind of all survivors who are willing to use their voices in this way.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm also feeling like just gratitude for all the people who've come on here before as well, because I've loved hearing their stories and appreciate their kind of vulnerability and strength going before me. So, so I'll just start with a little background. I grew up in Northern California in kind of a liberal, non-religious family, more spiritual, hippie folk, and very close with my mom and sister, very close with my dad until he started working a lot. In my sort of preteens and teens, we kind of got more distant because of his work schedule. So there was definitely kind of a hole where he was missing. And there was a desire for male attention as I entered my teens, sort of getting involved romantically with men, very like back to back, always had a boyfriend, kind of to get that male attention that I was missing. I got my BFA from UC Santa Cruz, focused on painting, got into songwriting after hearing Ani DeFranco, who I was like obsessed with. I used to go to her concerts like 6 a.m. to wait in line so I could get front row. Me and my friends were obsessed with Ani DeFranco. So she got me started on a songwriting passion. And I started a professional songwriting career after graduation, touring and recording, really working hard at that passion. And I think my 20s were a very sort of lonely period for me, just a lot of loneliness and longing for the divine, I would have called it at the time, or God, and that sense of inner strength and fortitude I just felt like wasn't there. And I was doing a lot of touring and performing to try to get love from the outside, and it just wasn't working. It was feeling really depleting.
Interesting. I'm actually curious a little bit about that, and kind of how did you at such a young age, and I know you were actually performing in front of pretty large audiences, I believe. And so how was that for you? Kind of standing up there, putting yourself out there, just knowing that it's also your own heart and soul being poured into music, and also feeling and being aware of the part that felt kind of lonely or not, as you put it, I think, strong. Was that kind of a conscious struggle, or was it more kind of a subversive or subterfuge movement happening, if you don't mind my asking?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think you'll kind of start hearing the roots in this answer of why the cult was appealing. Definitely, I felt like growing up, I had a lot of sort of flashy talents. Like I was a very naturally gifted visual artist, painter. I got a lot of attention for that. I also was a fashion model, so I got a lot of attention for my physical appearance, and I got a lot of attention performing as a musician. So I felt in a way like I was fooling everyone, like a little bit of like you guys don't really see me, you just see all these things that I do, and sort of being able to manipulate and fool men into falling in love with me. And I think those were some of the roots of like my really being susceptible to the particular narcissism of my cult leader, where he wasn't gonna buy that. And he was gonna like point out my shit. And that really felt like real to me. Like I was really looking for the real. So in a way I just felt so like lacking in core strength at that phase of development. And really, like I used to feel like almost like a feather on the wind. Like I was so vulnerable to feeling hurt and so vulnerable to feeling judged and criticized. And I just didn't feel like I had a strong connection to my inner strength or my higher strength.
Yeah.
So at the time I remember just like at one point getting on my knees and just praying for a teacher, just like really praying for that inner growth. And in college, I was exploring psychedelics and relationship workshops and, vegan diet and yoga and eventually meditation, just really trying to look for where can I gain this deep connection that I know is potential for humans to have and that I feel is missing, painfully missing.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, wow. Yeah, I think you described the experience, certainly one that I can relate to in my 20s, of that kind of missing link. And how interesting that we live with that within us, and yet we kind of go through this period of time of almost missing it in our 20s or a longing to discover it, so it's just striking me in a different way right now, I think, in terms of actual kind of psychological, emotional development that's natural for humans, as well as kind of that element of a deep, deep desire to feel connected, with oneself and everything, I guess, right? Other humans, nature, the divine, whatever we, want to call the thing that is big.
Absolutely. Yeah. And as you say that, I'm just remembering my first relationship workshop with a teacher at UC Santa Cruz that, there was the first flavor of group mind and with that group connection that was deeper. And I remember feeling like, wow, this is where the nugget is in this kind of intense inner work where people are doing this together and we're really breaking down the barriers and we're coming into a real close heart connection. That was kind of the first flavor of me longing for that kind of, deep connection with a group. And yeah.
Oh, right. And just, I think also in hearing you share, I'm just so appreciating the elements that are so a part of our nature, right? The part that really, when we are in community with others, there is something so natural about that, especially when we, are growing and deepening in our skill sets where we can communicate and really discover and care about one another. Just what a core element that is.
Yeah, exactly. Such a core human need that is not valued as much in our sort of individualistic culture. So it's missing. It's kind of, again, it's a little bit of a hole in our culture.
Yeah. Yeah. So share with us a little bit about this kind of initial encounter.
Yeah, that you are a starring role in. I was joking, Jen was my cult bait because she's so lovely. So yeah, I was teaching yoga. I got my yoga teacher training, and I was still, working on my fourth recording with a producer in New York. So I was flying back and forth from New York to the Bay Area, and I was teaching a yoga class, and my student one of my students was also a student at the OCS, and she talked about it as her spiritual school, which that term just really worked for me. I was like, if she had said church, I would have been like, no, I'm too hippie for that. Yeah. But spiritual school, that was it. I was like, what is this? That's what I want. And so she said that they were looking potentially for a yoga teacher on Saturday mornings. So I needed money, I'm in my 20s. And so it was a double appeal. So I remember I drove up to the Oakland location, this bright blue building, and you answered the door, and you were in black clerics, which was a little shocker for me. But I just remember your eyes and like your bright, warm presence, and just really like this sense that you really genuinely wanted to know me, which is a little rare. And now that I know you, I know that's just part of you, but it was also like, you were really like there in a service role. And so I really felt that. And then I started teaching yoga there. Then I quickly went to a Mother Claire seminar, meeting Mother Claire. I remember feeling like this strong, wise woman feeling from her, which was really something I was longing for. I had a super close relationship with my mom, but it was more as like a friend kind of relationship, where she didn't own that wisdom that she has, but didn't like have the security to own it as much as Mother Claire was like a midwife, and just really, she just had this strong, wise woman quality and no bullshit. She was just like, would look straight into me. And I remember my first blessing, because we would get a blessing from the teacher. I asked her to bless my music path and to remove like all ego from it so that it could be pure. And I remember in her blessing and then her sharing afterwards, she was like, yeah, I felt a lot of ego around it. And I was just like, damn, like she was no bullshit. And I really liked that, because I felt like, again, like I could work the crowd. I could get the external approval, and it just wasn't happening with her. So I felt like she was calling me deeper. And yeah, that was a big part of the appeal, was meeting her. And then the other master teacher, as you know, is Peter. And I met him because he actually lived at that center. So I met him, regularly after that. And it was similar. It was like, I felt like he really saw through my BS, and saw all my sort of negative things at the time was appealing. And as I'm looking at it now, I'm like, that's so interesting, because now I wouldn't even call it negative. I would just call it where I was at.
Yes.
And I have such a different lens towards myself now, that there is no good, bad in my lens towards myself. It's all just what is true. And then what unfolds from there is the work that I do with God, and is between me and God. And so at the time, like needing this person to like point out my stuff, that to me is like, wow, that's a very basic level. And that was where I was at developmentally. So yeah, I felt like he really saw me. He also had a very warm quality, as you know, like he could really turn on the warmth and sort of embody the Father, that the holy, wise, present Father that I think so many of us were longing for. And that's, yeah, go ahead.
If you don't mind, I was just thinking, Jaia, about what you were just sharing of this kind of phenomenon that happens really in so many of these groups, where there is a leader that's pointing out our faults and foibles. And just recently, I was thinking about this a little more and kind of this attraction to it, because I find that a lot of people share that they think of that as having been kind of like a fast track, or that it was really beneficial in some way to have somebody kind of pointing things out directly. And so it's something that I kind of thought about, because obviously, like even in therapy, that's not the role of a therapist. And just that distinction between really pointing someone toward their own discovery and self-empowerment versus this concept of sort of a fast track that you.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. I love that you bring that up. It's so interesting. I really feel clear on it. I really feel clear that no, it's not a fast track. It's actually a way to put the student in fight, flight, freeze. And if you look at what happens in that mode when the sympathetic nervous system is turned on, there is no soul unfolding. There is a restriction and a panic, and then a need for release from it through the teacher's approval. So you're going to manipulate your behavior to get that approval to set you at ease temporarily until the next wave. That is not authentic growth. That is not unfolding of the soul. The soul is like, the quality of the soul is like it's like a jellyfish. It's like a gentle, moving jellyfish that has to feel safe and held by a loving container to open and unfold.
I love that image. It's like, it's also amorphous and it's shifting.
Yes. And there is no, like, my lens now is so different because I've done continued spiritual work since leaving. And like, I just look back on how basic this phase was, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, there is something wrong with the psychological and spiritual abuse, but there's nothing wrong with the basic level that we were working at. You kind of have to go through that as part of ego development, like we were talking about earlier in our conversation before this. Like, the ego development, it has to go through this idealization phase, often with a male figure. So often that's dad. But if dad wasn't there, it's going to look for another one. And so a lot of us had Peter take that role, which he was happy to do, being a narcissist. Like, that's a dream job for a narcissist, is to take on this role of ego while our egos is developing. So you kind of need to latch on to this male figure, idealize them, hold on to their ego as your ego is developing. And so that's what happened for me. And then later there's going to be a fall, and I can talk about that, what that looked like for me later when I left. You have to go through the fall of idealization as part of your development of autonomy and self-efficacy. You have to go through that. So at this phase, I can look back and I can have compassion that, like, I was just in a phase of ego development where I needed this male figure of idealization, and he was glad to oblige, and I actually did, through meditating through the structure of the group, there was enough good to really keep me there.
Yeah.
And to give up a lot. As you know, I gave up a tremendous amount. You were part of that whole process of me leaving my fiance, selling our home together in Oakland, giving up my music career that was just gaining traction. I just had I was just about to release my biggest record. I had a whole, producer, manager, the whole team.
The international tour.
I had a little audience. And that was my big passion. And I gave it all up because there was enough of this, both the ego development piece that had to happen, as well as like developing a genuine devotional practice and a meditation practice, I was really feeling the benefits of that. That like just that alone, take away the culty leader. Like if you're meditating every morning and you're praying every day, your life's going to change.
Right.
And so I was having these really beautiful beginnings of this relationship with my divine nature.
Yeah. Do you mind, Jaia, if I just go back a few steps? A couple of things. One, just around, and this is sort of the first time I'm thinking of this in this way, but what you're saying about the ego development and kind of the phase that there would naturally unfold an experience with a parent where one would leave and kind of develop out of that relationship. But more so what I'm feeling is the nature of the relationship as it is appropriate prior to that leaving or breakage of some sort into the independence, that really is a phase also in parenting where your kid might be a teenager, but you're still kind of telling them what to do, right? And then we all feel so unseen in lots of ways by our parents. And so I think it's very interesting to just kind of feel into that relationship that certainly in our group we had with our teachers, which was very infantilizing. And as you know, you and I have discussed that. I'm not sure that I've ever stated this necessarily on the podcast, but there was a conversation that I remember being a part of with a group of the men when we first got out. And there was this moment where this like tremendous thud of truth landed into the group when one of the men said, "We were all castrated in that group."
Yes.
And truly that, there's the infantilization, and that in some ways, the attraction of being told your foibles and faults. The danger there also is that there's likely a tiny bit of truth to it.
That's the thing.
So much got manipulated, right? And as soon as you believe that the teacher is wise, they can then tell you things that actually aren't true about yourself that you begin to adopt and believe, and they become extraordinarily unhealthy and internalized.
Yes, well said. Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing, the theme. I think that cult leaders or anyone who is manipulating other people in this coercive kind of relationship, like they're always going to have a nugget of truth. And this is exactly what the inner critic does too. It's so similar. They both have a nugget of truth, right? Like, you slept in that morning. You didn't get up and get right to work at 8 a.m. You are a lazy little SOB. You are lazy. And that was Peter's voice, right? The truth is, you didn't get up at 8 a.m. That's the truth. So the compassionate, wise part of ourselves could say, why not, my dear? Like, why not? Right? And then there's this whole openness. Why not? The soul has space to feel the truth, right? But with this dynamic we got into with the teachers, immediately we go to, I'm bad. And I need this person to make me good. And they have the key to make me evolve spiritually to be good. The whole time, the goodness was already there. It was already there.
Right. And also, I'm just feeling again how the wisdom is there where, for example, in your, alarm clock scenario, within that group, certainly had I woke up late, there would be some self-shaming or blaming that would happen. Whereas most people, and let's go back to this developmental thing as well, right? Most people actually on their own will figure out by the time they're in their late 20s or 30s, when the alarm clock goes off, you could go, oh, I forgot to set it last night because I was doing XYZ. Silly me, moving on. And that's literally how simple it is.
Yeah.
Right? Instead of these groups, it's like the massive focus around all the indiscretions. It's like,
yes,
it's just so over the top.
Well, and this is how bad it can get. And I'm gonna say this on the air.
Yeah.
It can get to the point where you feel so bad about yourself that you think you're not a fit parent and you give your child up. That's how far this can go. And that's what we've seen happen.
Yeah.
And that breaks my heart.
Yeah.
Because we need so much self-compassion as parents. And I'll just speak to like the parenting thing. I am so thankful that I didn't have to raise my kids in that group that I got out before then, because, oh my God, parenting is the hardest thing on earth. And if somebody is picking at you for something like that, it's really easy to go there to think that you are not a fit parent.
Well, absolutely. And I think also, this is back to the incredible depth at which one can dismiss oneself. We could also say cognitive dissonance, but such a deep dismissal of oneself that you're able to listen to somebody else say that you should give your child away because you are just that lacking. And again, that's that play on a tiny element of truth, because every parent is lacking.
Oh, yeah.
Every parent knows they are. We are designed to. It's called being human. Let's normalize that. But within these groups, perfection is the standard that is held, which is unattainable. And so then people can seriously be manipulated in imagining that the little bit of truth is all they are, which is such a terrible person, or so unspiritual, or so of the darkness, I guess, which again, it's weird for me to even utter those words.
Yeah.
But that one can actually adopt that so deeply.
Exactly.
That one would imagine that they actually are agreeing to giving up a child.
Yeah, that came from them, somewhere in them. And the symbiotic relationship with that, and our leader, Peter, his whole thing of like, really what I see playing out now is his projection of all of his family stuff onto everyone else so that he doesn't have to feel it. So like wherever in him is a deep-seated, insecurity about his own parenting, which like we all know was not perfect, just do not feel that. Do not be accountable to that. Do not look at that in yourself, but just freaking project it out on everyone else. It's a perfect family constellation for him to work out his stuff indirectly. So like his own parenting stuff, his own abuse history, like I don't even know. This is like, maybe we should go back to our outline. But, there's, in that group, it was a very common thing for him to point to abuse in families that I know for a fact did not have abuse happening in them. Yeah. So this projection was rampant about sexual abuse in childhood that didn't happen, but it happened in his family. Yeah. And so you just see the projection, the absolute refusal on his part to deal with his stuff and put it out on all these people. And that again is heartbreaking. And I think about these families a lot. Yes. That, how that's affected these families.
That's right. And thank you for opening that up, because it really is where the massive danger lies in these dynamics, that we are actually following individuals who are seriously flawed. So maybe this is a good public service announcement. No one's perfect. So we should never be following anybody assuming that they have it all together. And certainly Peter, not only does he not have it together, and there are numerous examples that I could give of his quote unquote guidance, meaning his supposed direct line of communication to the exact voice of God that he believes he has. Not only can I share numerous examples of how that guidance was completely wrong for people, which means his connection is false, his sight is false, and yet everyone is hanging on to what he's saying as complete truth. And what you say also, I'll just bring this in a little bit, that is very fascinating behind what we label as malignant narcissism. So narcissism that really becomes harmful, which is the category that I would put him in. The root of that, if we look at patterns, right, a common root of that is that one grows up with a lack of attachment and chooses narcissism, right? Because not everybody needs to make that choice who experiences abandonment issues or attachment issues. And the ones that actually take on a ton of shame because they feel unloved, right? Because nobody's paying attention to them. That actually it's the projection out of that shame that is absolutely unbearable to them that then goes on to these communities. And that's actually why the communities end up functioning with so much shame, why everyone's shaming each other, why there's public shaming, why there's shaming when people get shunned and leave about those people, because Peter is projecting his inner shame out onto everyone else so he doesn't need to feel it.
Yeah. No, I think that if you go to the root of any abuser, you're going to find a really sad story. And it does bring compassion. You know, I do actually have compassion for him. And it's so unfortunate that it's spewing into other people's lives in this way.
Well, and then the other one little element that might also be helpful to the audience is, you know, Jaia, when you talk about trauma and sustaining constant critique, or even sustaining that one has to worry about the possibility of that critique coming. So being constantly on edge or being keyed up inside around that. As you mentioned, we have these responses that people are very familiar with. But you know, the other response that was a shocker for me personally, because I actually now believe it's what I was in, is that another response is fawn.
Yes, appease. Yeah. Fawn. I haven't heard that word. I've heard appease as a fourth option in the fight, flight, freeze, appease, just probably because it rhymes. That's why people use that one. But yeah, fawn. I totally relate.
And when I think about that and how kind of good I was, you know, that I was constantly trying to be what this vision was that I imagined I was supposed to be. And I think that because I chose the fawn response, I was preferred because it was.
Yeah, the fighters didn't last long in that group.
Well, and what's interesting, I think he kept a number of fighters around so that they could be an example of people who were kind of autonomous and independent, so that the others kind of couldn't go, oh, we're a group of weak people being controlled, because there were people that might kind of speak out or challenge, or like I would do that, but behind the scenes in very specific arenas, because again, I was fawning, I was being appropriate and challenging appropriately in a way that I knew he would accept. And that also probably that my opinion would be actually respected, which again is really tactical manipulation when it comes down to it, because the more we're all thrown off our game of feeling respected and then disrespected, then you feel a greater desire and tendency to try to get the respect again, right? Or try to be in the good graces again. So,
yeah, I can see that. I can see that in some of the folks in our group, that there was a healthy chutzpah, but it was never towards anything negative towards the teachers.
Right. And I think also some of these things do have to do with the actual personalities of the teachers, because I think that Peter actually likes to spar a little. It creates excitement for him. And because he needs that, he probably has a few people around that will provide that.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. So let us return.
So
of our long and windy road.
It's going to be, we're letting it flow. We have an outline, but we're definitely veering a little bit, and that's fine. I'm just looking at, that initial meeting of Peter, that idealization starting, and like I said, meditating every morning and praying was really good for me. And being accountable and, starting to examine my life, that was all really good, really positive. But I did start to see some red flags at the beginning. And I know you asked me to note some red flags. So I had a lot, actually. I had to kind of edit them. I remember one of the first nights that I came to an evening event, Peter was playing guitar. He was a songwriter also. And he had it was all women, like literally sitting around his feet while he was playing guitar. And I remember I walked in a little late, and I just had this kind of gaggy feeling seeing it. I was like, this just looks like a cult with groupies. Like, it looks like he's in a robe and he's playing a guitar and there's people at his feet like swooning. And I'd been a professional songwriter for 7 years. I'd been to all kinds of music. So I had like a music background, and I still like Peter's music. I think it's fine. But it wasn't, to me, it was a disproportionate amount of revering that was happening for the music that was coming out. And I was a little repulsed. And I was also, I'm a very honest person. I tend to say what I feel and value honesty. So I remember sharing afterwards that I was a little repulsed by I think I called it the groupies vibe that I got.
Yeah.
And that was like me voicing a red flag at the beginning.
Yeah.
And the way he handled it was really tactful, actually. He said, well, why don't you check in with them and ask them how they're genuinely feeling? And I remember being like, like just relaxing into, this is a very open, like we can all be honest. And I felt their genuine love for his music. And then I relaxed into that, and I became a groupie. Like the next time he played music, I let myself swoon. And so that was one red flag at the beginning. And then I remember a few months later, along the lines of his songwriting aspirations, that we were all to work off sort of on our own, spend a lot of time promoting him for a Grammy. And I remember thinking, WTF. I was like, a Grammy? And I remember thinking, that's a little grandiose, That's like, wow, he has like this tiny little group of culty followers and he's going for a Grammy. I was like, all my music background, I'd worked my butt off for 7 years, like doing the songwriter thing. And I was like, I don't think I even feel remotely close to a Grammy. So I remember just being like, I'm not allowed to say any of this. And by that time I didn't say it, but I just thought it. And they sensed my reluctant energy, and I had a talking to about like opening my mind and, you know, being less pessimistic about the music thing. And I took it all on. I was like, yeah, that's true. I'm a little jaded about the music thing because I worked my butt off for 7 years and I like just now got a record deal. And, you know, so there was truth in that nugget again, but it was used to manipulate me into working the machine for Peter to have a Grammy. That was another red flag.
Which is so funny. I love that you brought that one up. I think I have to publicly reveal here that this is one of the topics where there has been lots of laughter, because as you may know, I am married to a musician who graduated from New England Conservatory. I am very good friends with the gentleman who produced all of Peter's music when it was first coming out. And so this happens to be a topic of, I would say, if there's any area where there's making fun of happening, it's around this topic.
Yeah. I feel like it's you know, it's a narcissism, right? It's a mental illness. And at the time, I already felt the restriction around not being able, I wanted to laugh about it. I remember like when I first heard, there was like this inherent like bubbling of laughter because it was so ridiculous. And then so I could feel the relief, the necessary relief of all of us of being able to laugh about it. Not that it's mean-spirited, but like, it's a relief because we weren't allowed to laugh about it then, you know? Yeah. And so not out of cruelness towards him, like he's mentally ill, not out of cruelness, but just that there's a relief of like, we can freaking laugh about this now because it was ridiculous, you know? Ridiculous. So I'll laugh with you about that a little. Yeah.
Well, also the way that we had all these incredible musicians, you know.
Oh my God, such talented music, and we weren't allowed to play our songs. So that was one of the first things as I got more involved. It was for my own healing to leave major attachments. And this is like a yogi path in a way. Part of me resonated with like, yeah, let go of your attachments. You know, this is a spiritual truth. Even the, like, you know, that Bible passage where you can't walk through this gate with all your stuff. It felt like that. And I was really ego attached to my music. That was true. But then again, like my new lens is like, well, let's explore that, darling. Like, you're so attached to your music. Let's explore it. Let's open it up. You don't have to cut it off, which is like so primitive and so basic. Like, oh, if you're attached to sex, you have to stop having sex. No, let's explore. Like, what is it about sex? What is it about your music? What is it about your relationship that you're attached to? Like, let's explore it. And can you just feel the soul like opens? The soul opens as that light comes in. Well, but yeah, you cut it off, you're going to just develop all these scar tissues. Yeah. And that's what was happening.
Scar tissues and unfulfilled possibilities and potential.
Exactly.
And that's where I feel, that's what I return to when I feel the people who are still with him.
Exactly.
And that's where my sadness lies, is all of the ways in which these people would have flourished beyond what's happening for them now, given the possibilities of the world that they could explore.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's like if you're cutting parts off of yourself, you're also cutting off yourself. Yeah. You're not just cutting off the bad parts, you're cutting off yourself, which doesn't make any sense, because then you're going to have to re-heal. And yeah. So anyways, very primitive looking back. But at the time,
well, and also a primitive on the level of understanding development, as we keep going back to this topic, it's like, doesn't every single musician have to pass through that flame of that fire, which is ego? I mean, I don't know one musician that doesn't struggle with stuff around that, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's so funny because at the time that I was joining the OCS, I was living in Oakland. My current practice is Diamond Approach with Ridwan School. And that was literally like 10 minutes from my house. And so it's such an interesting thought that I sometimes have of like, what if I had not gone through the OCS and I had gone straight into Diamond Approach, which is this voice that I've been bringing in of like, what's that like, darling? Like what? Let's explore it. Like, not in a cheesy way. When I say darling, it's like really like the beloved. Like, what is true? Let's see it. Let's, like, by seeing it, let's caress it. Let's like love it. And so I just often think, wow, my 25-year-old self, like, what if I had gone to Diamond Approach instead of the OCS? And it's sort of like questioning, like, what if I had skipped my first marriage and gone into my second marriage? You weren't the same person, so you can't really know. But it's just so interesting, like, that it was 10 minutes away. It was 10 minutes away from where I lived.
The other thing I find fascinating, and you and I have kind of talked about this in other environments, but it's very intriguing to me that you ended up finding the Diamond Approach to be such a fulfilling and loving way to process and understand oneself. I'm sure it's way beyond that. You're welcome to say more about it. That's probably a lame summary.
No. And I can share more about that later on when we talk about leaving, because that was a huge, huge blessing in my leaving process. Yeah.
Well, and it's so fascinating to me that, as you know, I've had two other people trying to think. Pamela Dyson refers to Diamond Approach in her interview in season 1, and that really being a huge tool of healing for her. And one of my supervisors, actually, with IFS, Internal Family Systems, also uses Diamond Approach as a complementary element to the IFS work. And when you and I have spoken, I so relate to these ways in which you're speaking, because I think Internal Family Systems also is such, it sounds very aligned in terms of acknowledging these different parts of us. And what we know as we get to know each part of us is that every single part has a good intention for the system, even if it's wild or kind of out of control or exhibits behaviors that we maybe would not prefer in our lives. When we actually enter into dialogue and connection, that really has to be done through a loving lens and through a compassionate lens. Otherwise, those parts don't share completely, and we don't get to know them completely. And then we're not in complete relationship, which is where all the gold nuggets lie in terms of what those parts want from us, in terms of how to heal. Just sometimes parts of mine just want like me to touch my heart a few times during the day as a reminder to signify that I'm with that part. It can be so simple, but just that. I think what I'm really acknowledging and feeling, Jaia, is how interesting it is that we have turned toward these paths of inner work and healing that are truly through a lens of compassion and care and curiosity.
Yes, absolutely. And it's interesting as you're talking, like when you put your hand on your heart, I flash back to a moment earlier when I said, not in a cheesy way do I say my darling. And that was me responding to my internalized inner critic of Peter, sort of making fun of me for being cheesy, calling it darling. And I just want to say that that's exactly what we were up against, was this precious, like this sweet and tender relationship with ourselves got really shaken up. It got really shaken up and not developed in that school. And so that's what I'm so grateful for Diamond Approach, because I feel like that's its great strength. And it sounds like IFS also is like this strength in really no badness. It's just all different truths that we get to explore.
Yeah.
Right. And love and grow.
Yeah.
So,
and I do want to say, and this is really just for the audience, Jaia, that as we speak to these two modalities, that also there are many more.
There are many, yeah. There are many, and that's that I want to say that I'm speaking to people now who are still in the group, because this was a huge thing that we were taught, was that Peter and Claire were the only big kids on the block. They were the only master teachers on the planet. And if there were more master teachers, don't you think they would know it? Because they know they're on that vibration. They know. So I just want to say that is not true. And that should be a comfort to you, because if he's the only master teacher on earth and he's removing moles because moles are the darkness, and having people leave their kids, that is a shitty world if that's the only master teacher on the planet. And I just want to speak to you that there is a world of light beyond that, and a world of growth beyond that. So if you're afraid that that's the only nugget that you're going to get, because that was my fear. I had such a hunger for growth. I had such a longing to grow and know God. And I really genuinely thought that that was the only place I could do that. And so coming out of that and finding that not only is there so much more, but that it can be gentle and loving, and you can have children, you can have partnership, you can have friends, like you can enjoy sex, like all these things. My soul can unfold so much more efficiently without that fight, fright, flight, appease, whatever that last one is.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you for speaking to that. I'd like to just clarify for the audience, when you made the reference to the mole removal. So this is a story that we've received from individuals who left, that a number of years ago, that the party line from Peter was that moles, meaning like the dark spots on your body, on your skin, that they are representative of one holding on to darkness. And so he decided that he would offer an afternoon where everybody could line up and outside his workshop, and people would go in one by one and have this procedure done where he would remove these moles. I was told that if the procedure was particularly painful, that some of the priests would hold people down. That is just a story that we are starting to talk about publicly, because in my mind, that's practicing medicine without a license. I don't think I need to say much more about just the bullshit behind that, and why would somebody want to offer this to a community. It's very difficult for me not to draw a parallel to the Nexium group and the branding that went on there, because that is an act of submission. It is an act where he has power over, and it's an act where manipulation has happened to even get somebody there. Like a lie that a mole represents holding on to darkness. I mean, how are people supposed to say no to a mole removal if it means that they are choosing actively to hold on to their darkness when the entire mission of the group is supposed to be a movement toward light? There's no real choice there. So this is just one of the stories that we're kind of beginning to talk about, to just expose some of this stuff that is potentially illegal and also just wrong.
Yeah. And it's hard to imagine if you're not if you've never experienced being in a group, like, why on earth would anybody agree to such a crazy thing? But you sort of progressively build your loyalty. You progressively get the perks of that loyalty, you receive the benefits of that loyalty, and you start cutting yourself off more and more from outside influence. So like I was asked to join the novice program after I started for, I don't know, the first year I was involved. And that involved leaving my fiance, selling our house, moving from California to Minnesota, and leaving my music career that had just started. And I wanted to do it. It wasn't, I remember when you called me at work, I was nannying for a little girl, and you called me, and I remember how excited I was. You said, we've got guidance that you should move to the novice program. And I was really excited because I was so excited about spiritual growth, and I was feeling the benefits of my meditation practice. And I was feeling the benefits of like just all these changes that were happening, like letting go of my attachment to music actually started feeling freeing. And like there was all this life potential because there are truths that we were working with. I was very attached to my music, and it was dysfunctional. And this was a very harsh cut off the arm that reaches for the woman kind of way of teaching, but it kind of works temporarily in a certain way. And it started feeling like it felt right. And so I moved to Minnesota. I swore celibacy. This was something like, oh my God, I'd had a boyfriend since I was 13. So back-to-back boyfriends since I was 13. So I was really excited to have this period of like growing my autonomy and my strength. And there's so many mixed baggy things here, because like at the same time that I was growing my autonomy and strength in this one way, I was really dependent on my teachers in another way, and really relying on their knowing and their guidance. I was just in this obedience mode. And as you've experienced and shared in your testimonial, there is something really simple and lovely about obedience. There's a quality to it that's like this open-hearted humility. And that is a beautiful place to be. And so that it's not black and white. The novice years that I was there were some of the happiest years. I had like sisterhood for the first time without the man being the center of my attention. We had a lot of opportunity to work through stuff. I was living with like up to 10 women in 2 houses, and, being in the snow for the first time and having these really beautiful Easter services and morning communion meditation, and kneeling at the altar and just feeling totally washed in Jesus and Mary's presence. That was real. And the twist on it, though, was that it was somehow coming through the master teachers, when really like that just is like that devotional relationship. You can have that without the teachers. And at the same time, feeling really grateful for that full experience. So yeah, I have a lot of positive memories of that time, actually. And then a lot of the really harsh, like I remember incrementally, it seemed the teachers got harsher with me as I climbed the ladder. Like I was ordained a minister. And I remember one of the huge red flags for me was, when I was first ordained a minister, I got to go to the minister meeting for the first time at retreat. And I just remember thinking, like, we're just going to like pray for everyone and love everyone up and serve everything. And we're just like, we're going to be on fire with love. And I remember going into that meeting and it was just like people bashing other people. Like I remember people talking about students really in a very base, harsh, demeaning way, and who was not doing well and who like almost like chickens pecking at the underdog, the bottom of the pecking order. And it was harsh. And I just remember that was a repeated red flag for me, was like, we're doing all this inner work to be servants of Jesus, and we're ending up in these meetings where we're just bashing on each other. And the teachers are like, it almost felt like this, like they enjoyed it, especially Peter. Like it felt like he kind of enjoyed the meanness, which now I see was his family, right? He was used to that. Even worse, even violence. So to him, it was like familiar. He was creating a familiar environment. And for me, I did not grow up with violent family. It was shocking to me. And there was not violence going on, but it was verbally, spiritually, emotionally violent.
I feel like that's a point that it's so obvious to me that the teachers are the ones that set the stage for that, because I think so many of us really didn't get that. You know, it was such a bizarre experience. It, like, as you shared so well, it's like it just didn't sit right, I think, for so many. That was definitely one of those ones that was that thing that got put on the shelf for me, you know, and I constantly kind of look at it and go, this just doesn't feel good. Or sometimes things feel mean, you know. And again, I think it was the self-teaching that I had taken in my mind around that was that, in fact, it was just direct and efficient. And so
yes.
helpful, right? That's
yes.
kind of how I taught myself about it. That
we had to fit things into, this is the good thing. This is the only good thing. We had to take that cognitive dissonance and kind of manipulate it and fit it in to like, no, but these are the master teachers. They know everything. Like, you know, they're going to guide me towards total enlightenment. And this is like the only game in town. So we had to fit everything, that those little voices of like, this seems really base, or this seems really kind of aggressive, or this doesn't seem that helpful or mean. We had to like fit it into, no, it's direct, or it's this person really needed a chiropractic adjustment of the spiritual teaching, you know?
And that's where these things mess with the moral compass. And I think it's part of the reason why when people get out, in addition to the fact that it's difficult to just concisely describe all of the tactics of manipulation and influence and group that happen with the group environment, but that element where you have to contort things inside of yourself, I think that is what results in this experience of so many people expressing this term, this adjective to describe the inner world, which is like tangled when they get out.
Yeah.
Like tangled. It's sort of like a big swirling kind of mess. Like, where does it begin? Where does it end? What do you look at first? You know, how do you even approach this thing to heal? Something needs to be healed, but you don't, you know, it's just tangled. And I think that's one of the, when you said that, Jaia, I was like, oh, that's part of that tangled puzzle and stuff.
Yeah.
We so hope that you enjoyed this episode, and please stay tuned for part of Leaving the Cult, the season 2 song written by Jaia Suri, and for all things related to Jaia, her music, ways that you can support her, check out the show notes.